Now, we know that in both sides of this conflict, getting agreement, even if there was a peace deal on the table,
Yeah,
getting all Israelis to align to it, getting the factions on the Palestinian state and the Arab states together would be a challenge.
yeah.
And it feels like both sides have this issue. Who are the leading voices on either side of this that are striving towards either a two-state solution or at least some sort of bridge to that? Because
Yeah,
honestly, the loudest voices today on both sides seem to
right.
be those who are simply saying, we fight on.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that without a doubt, they are the loudest voices, they are the most credible voices, and they are the voices that excite the most passionate interest. But one of the reasons for that is that after the Second Intifada was the great inflection point. It occurred immediately following the failure of the Camp David summit in July of in August, at least sometime in the summer of 2000. I forget the month, but with Arafat and Barak and Bill Clinton. And that was a total failure, and it was a failure on all sides. The Israelis came with a totally unworkable plan that denied Palestinians real statehood. The Palestinians came without a counteroffer. They came up with a counteroffer later, but they didn't have a meaningful counteroffer at the time. And so that was a big failure. And then Bill Clinton had a good bridging proposal, which is the Clinton parameters, which he kept in his pocket. And instead of pulling it out and bridging, he kept demanding the Palestinians accept the Israeli formula that was not workable. So dumb, dumber, and dumbest, in my view. And in that order. And the Israelis were dumb, the Palestinians were even dumber, and Clinton was the one who really screwed up because he had a potential solution. And he kept it in his pocket until later. And when he pulled it out and talks resumed quietly in Taba and elsewhere, it was too late. And it didn't work. And the Second Intifada slowly developed, and that was very violent. And a lot of people got killed, much more Palestinians than Israelis, but enough Israelis to traumatize Israel. The suicide bombings and all of that that began in January, February of 2001, which I was a big critic of. But still, it really traumatized both peoples and their supporters on either side, killed the Israeli peace camp, wrecked up Palestinian confidence in the Israeli desire for peace, obviously on the other side as well. So both sides started turning to maximalist formulas, whether a complete state of their own or a binational state they anticipate controlling on the part of the pro-Palestinian advocates of that. One of the reasons it's so appealing to them is not just that they love equality, it's that they expect Palestinians eventually to control that state because they expect there to be more of them. And they think that demography is destiny, and they haven't learned a thing from human history, not one blessed thing. I mean, they're just as out of it as you could imagine. On the other hand, it's still the case that the PLO, represented by the aging, I mean, he sort of does embody the condition of the institutions he represents. But Mahmoud Abbas, who's in his late 80s, who's a chain smoker in terrible health, who could not have possibly made a bigger mess of his role as head of the PA and head of the PLO, nonetheless, he remains steadfast for a negotiated two-state solution. He's opposed to violence. His security forces still work closely with the Israelis in the West Bank, despite everything, to try to tamp down violence. And if they want a credible partner, they just won't get a better one than him, even though he's sort of useless from a kind of a physical and even in a way political point of view. If they made a two-state solution plausible and viable, either he would snap back to life or someone else would replace him, because it would be very popular among Palestinians. Palestinians are desperate. They need a solution. They don't believe it exists, but their main institution is still committed to it. Hamas claims to represent the Palestinians, and October 7 is an effort for them to gain control of the movement. They were formed during the first Intifada in 1987, when there was a vacuum of leadership for complicated historical reasons I'll blow off here. But there was a vacuum of leadership and an uprising on the ground in the occupied territories led by ad hoc committees, kind of Gramscian committees of resistance and correspondence. And the Brotherhood in Gaza saw a vacuum. The PLO was gradually coming back into the West Bank, but they founded Hamas to challenge the PLO and Fatah, and to say no, the Palestinian cause is not a secular nationalist cause; it's an Islamist cause, and it should be led by us, not you. And that was the goal, and they haven't achieved that yet. And the main reason they haven't achieved it is the PLO still speaks for Palestinians on the world stage. Every time a Palestinian gets up at the Arab League, at the UN General Assembly, in the ICJ, in the ICC, which the Palestinians are present in all these multilateral institutions because the PLO became the state of Palestine at the General Assembly, a non member observer state. That gave them access to things like the ICC and the ICJ, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which is looking at charges against Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders in terms of the ICC, and charges against Israel for genocide in the ICJ. The only reason these groups have these multilateral agencies have any jurisdiction in these matters is that the state of Palestine acceded to the treaties that govern them through their membership in the UN General Assembly as the state of Palestine. So no one challenges the PLO's legitimacy, even Hamas. But what Hamas wants to do is take it over. So still, the voice of a two-state solution speaks for Palestinians. The problem is, on the Israeli side, anger over the Second Intifada and the widespread belief that Palestinians don't want peace and the only language they understand is violence and all of that has given way to grasping, territorially avaricious irredentism on the part of the Israeli right and even the Israeli center, with a determination to keep hold of most, if not all, of the West Bank because of its religious significance, which is much greater than most of Israel. It's really greater than the Galilee, greater than the Negev Desert, greater than Tel Aviv, actually, which is a greenfield site. There was nothing really there before the late 19th century when Jewish settlers formed it. It's sort of meaningless in biblical terms, whereas most of the West Bank is very meaningful. Or historical irredentist terms, or in terms of strategic thinking, where the Jordan Valley becomes this really important strategic area. So they want to grab it, and they don't want to give it back. And the problem is they don't want to incorporate the people or give the people any meaningful rights. And so this is where we are. We are headed on, we've been, since 2000, we've been on a very slow train that's gained speed. And it's become a faster, it's not a bullet train yet, but it's an express train. Towards a station called annexation slash expulsion. And I think there are a lot of people in the Israeli government now, today, who are waiting for an explosion of violence in the West Bank that would give them the opportunity to seize a lot of the territory and expel a lot of the Palestinians who live there, maybe into other pockets of the West Bank or something, and say they do this with the utmost regret. It's the last thing they would ever want to do, but that someone has to be the adult here. A divorce is necessary. They have to bite the bullet, and they cried, and they went to therapy and all of that, but they had no choice. And it's in everyone's interest, and the world should thank them. You can hear the script. So, that's, I think, one of the main reasons that violence has not spread in a major way in the West Bank, despite all these provocations from the Israeli military and from armed settler groups that are increasingly resembling the Ku Klux Klan, frankly, in the way they operate and their logic and their ethos. But the Palestinians are not really responding. It's partly because the PA remains committed to maintaining calm, and also because Palestinians I think they realize that if they rose up in anything like what Hamas did, or just simply took up arms against the Israeli military and armed settlers, they would find themselves expelled. This is very much on the table. I think the rest of the world is kind of blind to how close we are to this. But I think a lot of Palestinians in the West Bank are not. And it helps keep them calm because they don't want to give them this excuse. On the other hand, angry young men with no future, no rights, no nothing, but they do have guns, ultimately will probably give the Israeli extremists what they want. And we'll see what happens then.